get the paper covered initially. So I've done the same thing again there. I'll try and lift some of that out in a moment. All right, well, I've used a unipin marker to do a rough outline of the cow that I'm going to paint. And then to give myself a fighting chance at the background, I'm going to use watercolor just to put in a reasonably dramatic sky, some hint of some foliage perhaps, and some greenery down below. We'll see how that goes. So, okay, here we go. We'll start the clock. Big mop brush into my cobalt blue. Plenty of water. I'm going to pick up some of that violet that I still have on the palette. Go right the way through the drawing, back into some of that blue. Quick rinse out of the brush. Got a little bit of the quinacridone, I think that's how you pronounce it, orange there. So let's put some of that down for a little bit of land. And come in with the quinacridone green. Okay, so that's the watercolors applied. Now switching to my interactive acrylics, burnt umber, cad yellow light, cad red, ultramarine blue, tinting white. Bit of water sprayed on the palette. And now we need to mix up a kind of a yellowy brown for the base color of the animal. So burnt umber and a bit of yellow. Let's get a bit more yellow there. So it's gone a little greenish. Just a touch of red. Let's get a bit more yellow in there. A bit more of the red. It's a bit more what I was after. Get some of the white in there as well. Touch more red. That'll do for a start, I think. Now, the surface of the painting, for the most part, is fairly damp, so I'm hoping the paint's going to flow fairly readily. So we'll begin by just trusting. I haven't done the drawing all that carefully, but we're going to trust it initially, and then, because we've got limited time under this little challenge. Now, for the back, I'm going to push the brush upwards like this against the bristles to create a little bit of a frayed outline to the back. We'll curve the brush strokes that way to give us a little bit of a rounded sense of form. Again, push against the bristles a little bit so get a few more frayed edges, but without going too wild on that technique. So a flat brush of this size can be surprisingly precise, he says, having just made the most imprecise brush stroke so far. But you can use the corner to get into little fiddly bits if you're careful. I will change to a smaller brush in just a moment. the main thing is to get the paper covered initially. So I've done the same thing again there. I'll try and lift some of that out in a moment. Okay, not looking too bad, but we mustn't forget the tail. All right, a quick wipe of the brush with paper towel, just to remove some of the paint. Now let's get some white and mix that into the colour we've already got, and then I'm going to squint at my reference, and there's a band of white across the front of the head and the nose there, or band of highlight I should say. I'm not going to try and copy the colour exactly because obviously we don't have that much time. Flash of light on the ear. It's a little highlight there. Little highlight on the ear there. There are some creases in the hide there, so I just feathered the tips of the brush over the painting then, and then we can get a broader highlight in here across the back. So I'm looking at the way the hair on the animal is falling and approximating that direction of hair fall with my brush strokes, but also considering the contours of the surface as well. So it's a little bit of a compromise with each brush stroke, just trying to sum it up simply but hopefully effectively. We'll see how it works out in the final situation. Okay, so there's my first sort of highlight applied. Back in with the paper towel, get most of the paint off the brush again. Try and not get too much on my fingers. Going to go back around again, but this time I'm grabbing almost completely pure tinting white. Trying to pick out a few little highlights again, or brighter highlights. Because I'm working wet in wet, they're not coming out all that stark. The contrast isn't that high because my brush isn't that heavily loaded with paint, but we have to, just make a quick decision. And we won't know the full effect of what we're doing until the paint's totally dry. But for now, that'll do. So, chucking that brush into the water, switching to a smaller flat. Now I need to go and put in some darks. So, burnt umber, bit of ultramarine blue, perhaps get a bit more. And there's some shadow in the ear there, which comes up there. Some shadow under there. The ear's casting a shadow down the side of the head. shadow in the ear there as well. We're going to just put a gentle swathe of shadow across the front of the nose because we don't have too much time for subtlety. Little nook of shadow there, overdid it a touch there. Some on the knee. Hooves. It's a dark line of shadow there as well. And I think that's enough of that brush. Going to come in with a pointed brush. This is a brush I normally use for watercolor, but I think it should be okay for this purpose. Is that dry enough to touch with my finger? The background is just about. Hint at an eye. Hint at another eye. That's not too bad for the moment. Back to my small flat brush. Just wiping that off with a piece of paper towel again. We'll clean that out. Now I want to put a cast. I've completely lost track of time. I don't have a timer in front of me, so I'm just sort of doing this as quickly as I can. And then I'll check the time at the end. But hopefully you'll be able to see on screen how long it's taking. So what was I going to do? I was going to add some bluey shadows and a little bit of pink here and there, perhaps, just to warm things up. So let's grab a little bit more of the red and put it into the pale colour that we had there. Just to give a little bit of variety of colour. Go back in with the blue, pop that into the colour we already had. So that's now hopefully a paler more bluish shadow that I can pop in there. Few regions of shadow on the legs. We'll put some of this blue on the hooves, trotters, I guess. Let's put a hint of shadow in. And we'll leave it there. We'll see how long that took. All right, so I'm back from my brief bike ride in the spring sunshine, and still a little bit out of breath from walking up the hill, but the painting has, for the most part, dried, and I'm better able to judge the way the animal looks. And on the whole, considering the time limit, I'm fairly happy so far. I like the fact that because I didn't have any time, I just did a single brush stroke pretty much everywhere for the background, and consequently everything's nice and clean, got some nice cauliflowers and patterning going on. Now this little bead of watercolor is still here, so I'm actually going to try and make use of that. So I've got here, just grabbing it out of my brush holder, and let's pop it in a little bit of water before I show you. So I've got here, it's a sort of special brush which comes to a very fine point, you can see. And I'm going to try and use that to tease out that bead of watercolor. And we'll try and, I've no idea how well this is going to work, but we'll give it a go. Try and create a few branches using that little bead of watercolor as a reservoir. And I just want to join that up. So I think that's worked out okay. It looks like a weird tree creeping in from the left-hand edge of the painting. So what I'm going to do now is spend another 10 minutes or so working on the animal, and I've switched to my little filbert brush here, little flat brush with a rounded end, and I'm just grabbing some freshly applied to the palette tinting white. So just going to add some brighter highlights to the animal. And I'm, making sure that some of those highlights cut across between what is currently the rather hard boundaries that I've got between shadow and highlighted areas. Now I want to preserve some of the frayed kind of yellow ochre colour that I've got. So although I'm putting a highlight along the top of the rear end here, I'm deliberately keeping that darker outline. Because what I tend to do is, if I find I've got a nice effect which has occurred quite naturally, through a frayed brush, or with watercolor bleeding into a certain area, or whatever it is really, if I can, I'll preserve that even if it doesn't completely match reality. Now I've got to use this pure white fairly sparingly, because otherwise it doesn't, we tend to deviate from reality a little too much. But I can just kind of work my way around the animal, and as mentioned, put in a few bright highlights here and there. And then I'll probably come back to using that filbert in a moment. But for now, I'm just going to come back to this big flat brush, which is what I started out using, if you remember, for blocking in the animal. Just adding a little bit of water to my palette, and I'm just picking up a little bit of that tinting white again. Still got a little bit of the ochre left on the brush. I did just wash it out, but not overly thoroughly. I just want to soften some of the white I've put down and tease out some of those rather hard-edged highlight areas that I've put in. And again, we won't see the full effect of all of that until it's dried back. So for now, what I'm going to do is now do an extra little bit of drawing, but with the brush. So coming in with a round brush now, picking up pure ultramarine blue, and I'm going to add a few more descriptive lines to this animal, in part to hide some of the original line work that I've got there with the Unipin marker. I don't mind it showing too much, but I feel it's a little too obvious in places. Now the reason I'm choosing the blue is I feel it really sort of complements the colour that I've used. It's going to tend to bring out the orange in the colour that I've used so far for most of the animal. And the thing with using the brushes, in general, in terms of the way I apply the paint at least, you don't get all that consistent a line, which is kind of good, because you want the lines to be a little bit characterful rather than just a sort of a solid equal thickness line all the way around the outline of the animal. Okay, well, having done that, I'm now going to take that same blue and add a little bit of the cad red in there. So we get a purple. We'll get a little bit of white in there as well. Mix in a little more white again. And then I'm going back to my 1/2 inch flat now, mixing some yellow into the brown I had before, but with a little more of the red. And just going to add a spray of the water bottle to the palette. And I just want to kind of get more expressive again. Again, to soften up some of the boundaries we've got going on here between light and dark. Just put a little bit of water onto the cow. I don't want to put too much water onto the painting because of the watercolor, although providing I don't scrub the background, it should be okay. A little bit more white on the brush. And that sort of solidified things a little bit better there, I feel, with the animal, but I'm going to let that dry back a bit. And then the next stage for the foreground animal would be to add, you know, just a few more details to, and a few more stylized bits, I think, to make things pop a little more. But what I want to do now is just add some supporting characters to the painting. Now, some time ago, I used a watercolor marker for a little video on the channel where I just sketched the outline of cattle and then used a clean wet brush to kind of add a little bit of a sense of color and so on. Now, I don't want to use the brush bit, but I do want to try the idea of having this animal fairly well realized in the foreground, and then off in the background have some other cattle, but they're just going to be in outline. And part of the reason I'm doing this is, if you watched the video from a few months ago where I painted a preliminary study of a Canadian cowboy, at some point I want to come back and actually do the proper painting of that, and my plan is to have these cattle off in the distance in outline and the cowboy in the foreground, you know, more fully realized. And I just want to try out the idea, really. That's the plan. So, watercolor marker. This is a Prussian blue, I think. No, this is an indigo. So I'm going to use some of the animals from the same reference photo, but ones that are sort of just neighboring. And the idea is to just try and capture their character nice and loosely without going into too much detail. So we'll see how this goes. So my first thought is, even though I'm using the fine line nib of the watercolor marker as opposed to the opposite end, which is the brush tip, the line is still thicker than I expected it to be. But yeah, there we go. That's okay, I guess. So we've got a head here. Now, I probably won't do every single aspect of each of these animals. The idea is to just hint at them. keep things fairly loose. But hopefully capture something of the way these animals move and move around in groups, the way they sort of interact with each other. So just put the top part of a leg in there. Can't see a tail for that animal, so we'll leave that one as is for the moment. Now we've got another animal back here, head coming in. And this idea is sort of echoing also the street musicians painting that I did a few months back, where there were a group, there's a quartet, I think, of people playing musical instruments on the street. And I resolved them fairly fully, but I also had some pedestrians in the scene in the foreground, but I did them just in outline and with a bit of dry brush, if memory serves me correctly. I can't quite remember. But again, the idea was to lead the viewer's eye to the area of main focus, but still provide a little bit of context. So I've got another couple of animals there, and then there's a third one just sort of nuzzling in under the chin of that last one that I drew. Neck and back go up there, hint at an eye there. Struggling to see the head in full in my reference, but you can get down enough info that hopefully it hints at other animals in the background. So I think I want to add a couple more, or perhaps make this next one, perhaps just one more actually. Make this next one a little smaller if I can. And at the moment, I'm not quite sure how I feel about what I've just done. Certainly is a bit, different in the sense that these are almost sort of ghost-like and barely indicated. But I'm not sure whether I've added to the painting or not by doing that. But there we go. We'll ponder that while I have a little snack. So I'm going to use some Winsor Violet watercolor now to just block in some tone loosely on these background animals that I've put in. It's come out a little darker than I intended, so just add a little more water there. And so my thought is that, without getting too fussy, just want to create a sense of light and dark back here. And I quite like the idea of this cow being yellowish, and then the purple is obviously a complementary colour to yellow. And also it'll help these animals in the background blend into the background a little, or maybe not blend isn't quite the right word, but they'll be in keeping with the background where I've got this pale purple. And then sticking with that purple, I'm going to just roll the brush across so that they're kind of walking through some undergrowth, or they're in amongst some hedges. And at the moment, I'm feeling fairly happy with the addition of that watercolor wash. So let's go back to the main animal. So now I'm going to come in with this mauve Winsor & Newton watercolor marker, and my plan is to just add some fun line work to just kind of enhance what I've got going on here with the main animal. So I'm sort of combining drawing and painting here. And I quite like the way that's working against the colours I've already got in place with the paint. And I'm being careful not to just trace around the outline of my drawing or my painting. You know, the animal, as I mentioned earlier, I've got these kind of frayed bits of paint here from the very beginning, so I'm going to leave those. But my line work is kind of mimicking those frayed bits. So I'll put some purple marks there, but like I say, I want to keep that little frayed bit there from earlier. I like that. And again, I'm deliberately allowing my lines to pull away from the painting a bit. I think it gives it a little bit of life. Now, this bit here, I quite like that, so I'm going to leave that untouched. I think I do want to make these nostrils a bit darker. So I'm switching to an indigo marker there. I'm still not sure they're dark enough, but so just looking at what we've got, my feeling now is I just want to slightly, I feel this line of shadow is a bit harsh, and I could perhaps do with a couple of little highlights here and there. So following on from the idea that the yellow and the purple is complementary to yellow, I'm going to grab some cad yellow. So I'm just mixing up some cad yellow and a little bit of tube orange. I'll see what this looks like as a highlight colour. Yeah, I quite like that. I think it's giving a nice pop of brightness to to the image.